The courtroom fell into complete silence. No one moved. No one spoke. It was as if time itself had stopped. Judge Harold Stone, a man known for his sharp tongue and merciless attitude, sat frozen on his bench, his gavel hanging in midair. His eyes were wide with disbelief. His face, which had moments ago been twisted in amusement as he mocked the young man in the wheelchair before him, was now pale. The entire room, lawyers, reporters, jury members, watched in stunned shock. The disabled black teen who had just been humiliated moments ago had done something no one saw coming. He had just torn apart the prosecution's case with surgical precision, and he wasn't even supposed to be a lawyer. The judge had laughed at him, ridiculed his speech, and dismissed him as a joke. But now, in a courtroom where his fate had already seemed decided, the young man was standing, well, sitting, his ground, outsmarting the judge, the attorneys, and everyone else in the room. A slow, eerie realization washed over the judge's face. This teen wasn't just some random kid. He was a legal genius, a mastermind in disguise, and he had just turned the entire courtroom upside down. Judge Stone swallowed hard, his fingers trembling as he gripped the gavel. He opened his mouth to say something, anything, but before he could speak, the teen leaned forward in his wheelchair, locking eyes with him. "You should have been more careful, Your Honor," he said, his voice calm and cutting like a blade, "because you just walked into my trap." And with that, the courtroom erupted into chaos. 3 weeks earlier, rain poured down in thick sheets as Jamal Carter wheeled himself through the courthouse doors. He was used to the stares, the whispers, the assumptions. People saw the wheelchair and immediately wrote him off. They thought he was weak, helpless, a nobody. He was used to it, but today was different. Today, he was here as a defendant, accused of a crime he didn't commit. Jamal had spent his whole life proving people wrong, but nothing compared to what he was about to face. A courtroom filled with powerful lawyers who had already decided his guilt before even hearing his side of the story. A judge notorious for his bias against people like him. And worst of all, the entire city watching, waiting to see him fail. He took a deep breath as he rolled into the courtroom. The prosecution's lawyer, a man named Richard Powell, smirked as he watched Jamal struggle to position himself at the defense table. "You sure you don't need someone to speak for you, kid?" Powell asked with a chuckle. "I mean, let's be honest, this isn't exactly your expertise." Jamal ignored him. He knew how this game worked. The judge, an older man with deep wrinkles and piercing gray eyes, peered down at him from the bench. "And who is representing the defendant?" Judge Stone asked, barely looking up from his papers. Jamal adjusted his tie. "I am, Your Honor." For a moment, there was silence. Then, laughter. Actual laughter. The judge, the lawyers, even a few of the jury members chuckled. "That's funny, kid," Judge Stone said, shaking his head. "But seriously, who's your attorney?" Jamal didn't blink. "I just told you," he said. "I am." The judge scoffed, flipping through the documents in front of him. "You're telling me you're going to represent yourself?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you." The judge smirked. "Well, that's certainly ambitious." Powell leaned forward. "Your Honor, I think it's obvious this young man is not qualified to defend himself." "I have the legal right to represent myself," Jamal interrupted. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Do you even know what you're doing?" Jamal met his gaze with steady confidence. "We'll find out, won't we?" The judge chuckled, shaking his head. "This is going to be fun." The first hour of the trial was exactly what Jamal expected. The prosecution painted him as a reckless troublemaker, a nobody from the wrong side of town, someone who thought he was smarter than the system but was finally facing the consequences of his actions. The evidence against him was weak, but it didn't matter. The jury had already made up their minds. The judge barely hid his smirks as Powell paraded witness after witness, each one telling half-truths or outright lies. Jamal stayed quiet, taking notes, waiting. And then, when it was his turn to cross-examine, everything changed. Jamal started slow, asking small, seemingly insignificant questions. But then, one by one, he began to pick their stories apart. Tiny cracks turned into gaping holes. Contradictions started piling up. Witnesses stuttered, their confidence slipping. Powell frowned, shifting uncomfortably in his chair. The judge stopped smirking. And then, when it was time to question the prosecution's star witness, Jamal dropped the hammer. He pulled out a piece of evidence no one saw coming. A single document. A document that could prove everything they had said about him was a lie. The entire courtroom held its breath as he placed it on the table, his fingers tapping lightly against the paper. "This," Jamal said, his voice steady, "is what you didn't want me to find." The color drained from Powell's face. The judge's smirk disappeared. And in that moment, everyone realized the truth. Jamal Carter wasn't some helpless kid. He wasn't a joke. He was the most dangerous person in that room, because he was smarter than all of them. And he had just turned the trial on its head. The courtroom was dead silent. Every eye in the room was locked onto the single sheet of paper that Jamal Carter had just placed on the defense table. Judge Stone's usual smug expression wavered for the first time that day. Powell, the prosecution's lead attorney, looked as if he'd just swallowed a lemon. Jamal didn't rush. He let the silence stretch, let the weight of the moment sink in. Then, finally, he leaned forward in his wheelchair and slid the document toward the judge. "You might want to take a look at this, Your Honor." The judge hesitated before reaching for it. His fingers tightened around the gavel, as if debating whether to shut this down before it went any further. But curiosity, or perhaps unease, got the better of him. He took the paper and adjusted his glasses. As soon as he read the first few lines, his entire face changed. His smirk disappeared. His jaw tensed. Powell sat up straighter, his eyes darting between Jamal and the judge. What is that?" Powell demanded, though his voice was noticeably less confident. Jamal folded his hands, his expression calm. "This is a signed affidavit from your so-called star witness." He turned to the jury. "You know, the one who swore under oath that he saw me at the crime scene?" Murmurs rippled through the jury box. Judge Stone's grip on the paper tightened. Jamal continued, his voice measured but firm. "This affidavit, written and signed just days before this trial, clearly states that your witness was not actually at the scene of the crime that night. In fact, he wasn't even in the same part of town. Which means," Jamal let his words hang for dramatic effect, "he lied under oath." Gasps spread across the courtroom. Powell's face turned an ugly shade of red. That doesn't prove anything." Powell stammered. "This could be fake. A trick." "Objection." Jamal cut in, his voice sharp. "Baseless accusation. I'd be happy to have a forensic expert confirm the signature if Mr. Powell has doubts." Judge Stone exhaled heavily through his nose. He knew this wasn't fake. And worse, he knew that Jamal had just changed the entire course of the trial. The jury was no longer looking at Jamal like he was a criminal. They were looking at Powell like he was the one trying to hide something. Jamal tapped his fingers against the table. "This isn't the only inconsistency I've found," he said casually. "But don't worry. I'll go through them all one by one." Judge Stone looked like he was chewing nails. He turned to Powell. "Mr. Powell, do you care to explain this?" Powell opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Jamal had him cornered, and he knew it. 3 weeks earlier, Jamal sat in the holding cell, staring at the cold concrete wall in front of him. He had been here before, not because he was a criminal, but because he had spent his life being treated like one. Growing up as a disabled black kid in a rough part of town, people assumed the worst about him before he even spoke. They saw the wheelchair and thought he was weak. They saw his skin and assumed he was trouble. And now, those same people were trying to throw him in prison for something he didn't do. The charge was serious: armed robbery. The evidence? Circumstantial at best. A grainy security camera photo of someone who looked like him. A witness statement from a guy with a criminal record longer than a grocery list. It was a setup. Jamal knew it. But knowing didn't mean much if he couldn't prove it. His court-appointed lawyer had been useless. The man barely looked at his case file, already convinced that Jamal was doomed. "Best thing you can do is take a plea deal," the lawyer had said with a sigh, flipping through papers like he had somewhere better to be. Jamal had clenched his fists. "I didn't do it." The lawyer barely glanced at him. "Doesn't matter. You're facing 20 years minimum. They'll offer you 5 if you plead guilty." "That's a gift." "A gift?" Spending 5 years locked away for something he didn't do? That wasn't a gift. That was a death sentence. And that was the moment Jamal made his decision. He was going to defend himself. He had spent years studying the law, learning everything he could, not because he wanted to be a lawyer, but because he had seen what happened to people like him when they didn't understand the system. He had read case files for fun, memorized courtroom procedures, studied legal loopholes the way other kids memorize song lyrics. And now, it was time to put that knowledge to use. The first day of the trial had been brutal. Judge Stone had made it clear from the start that he didn't take Jamal seriously. Powell had practically laughed in his face. Even the jury had looked at him like he was some kind of joke. But that was fine. Jamal liked when people underestimated him, because it made it even sweeter when he proved them wrong. He had spent every night leading up to the trial combing through evidence, looking for cracks in the prosecution's case. And now, here he was, 3 days into the trial, and he had just cracked it wide open. Back in the courtroom, Judge Stone rubbed his temple. "This is highly irregular," he muttered. "Mr. Powell, I suggest you explain yourself immediately." Powell looked like he wanted to throw his briefcase across the room. Your Honor, I wasn't aware of this document." "That's interesting," Jamal interrupted, "because I filed a copy of it with the court yesterday. Someone must have overlooked it." Judge Stone's jaw clenched. He hated being made to look like a fool. Jamal knew that, and he used it to his advantage. "I move to have the witness's testimony dismissed," Jamal said smoothly. "Since we now have proof that he perjured himself." Judge Stone looked like he wanted to say no, but he couldn't. The law was the law. Motion granted. The courtroom erupted into whispers. Jamal leaned back slightly in his wheelchair, keeping his face neutral even though his heart was pounding. One down. Now it was time for the next move. But before he could even prepare, Powell slammed his hands on the table. "This is ridiculous." Powell exploded. "Your Honor, this boy is making a mockery of your courtroom. He's pulling cheap tricks, playing lawyer, and you're letting him." Jamal didn't flinch. He just turned to Powell and smiled. "A cheap trick," he echoed. "Or are you just mad that I caught you slipping?" The entire courtroom gasped. Judge Stone's expression darkened. "Mr. Carter, I warn you." "Warn me about what, Your Honor?" Jamal interrupted, his voice suddenly sharp. "About calling out the truth? About exposing the fact that this case was never about justice? About proving that the system already decided I was guilty before I even walked in here?" Judge Stone's nostrils flared. "This is my courtroom, boy. You don't get to stand here and act like—" Jamal didn't let him finish. He leaned forward, his next words cutting through the room like a knife. "No, Your Honor. This is my trial." And with that, the entire courtroom exploded into chaos. The courtroom was in complete mayhem. Voices clashed, chairs scraped against the floor, and a storm of whispers filled the space like a rising tide. Judge Stone slammed his gavel down so hard the sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. "Order! Order in the court!" he bellowed, his face flushed with anger. But the damage was already done. Jamal Carter had just flipped the trial on its head, and everyone in the room knew it. Powell, the prosecution attorney, was practically shaking with frustration. He pointed a trembling finger at Jamal, his voice an octave higher than usual. "Your Honor, this is completely outrageous. This kid is making a joke out of the judicial system." Jamal turned his head slowly, his calm eyes locking onto Powell like a predator sizing up its prey. "I'm not making a joke out of the system," he said coolly. "I'm exposing the fact that the system is a joke." The jury gasped. Judge Stone's nostrils flared. "You watch your mouth, Carter." Jamal didn't blink. "Why? You don't like hearing the truth?" A vein bulged in the judge's forehead. "I will hold you in contempt." Jamal raised his eyebrows. "For what? Defending myself?" Silence. The room was trapped in a moment of tense stillness. Judge Stone's grip on his gavel tightened. His face twitched, the muscles in his jaw working as he searched for something, anything, to put Jamal back in his place. But there was nothing he could do. Jamal had him pinned. The courtroom doors suddenly burst open, and a uniformed officer hurried over to whisper something into the judge's ear. Judge Stone's frown deepened as he listened. His fingers flexed and then, just for a moment, his eyes flickered toward Jamal, something unreadable in his gaze. Then he nodded, dismissing the officer, and turned his attention back to the courtroom. "This trial is adjourned until tomorrow morning," he announced abruptly. "We will reconvene at 9 a.m. sharp." The jury looked confused. Powell looked like he wanted to protest, but before he could say anything, Judge Stone slammed his gavel again. "Court is adjourned." And just like that, the session was over. Jamal exhaled, rolling his shoulders as people began filing out. He had done what he needed to do today, but something was off. Judge Stone had looked worried for a second, and Jamal knew better than to ignore a crack in the foundation. The moment he wheeled out of the courtroom, Jamal felt the change in atmosphere. There were more officers in the hallway than before. They weren't looking at him, but they were aware of him, watching from the corners of their eyes. Jamal's gut tightened. Something wasn't right. "Yo, Jamal," a familiar voice called out. He turned his chair and spotted his best friend, Malik, rushing toward him. Malik was tall, built like a linebacker, and always had a way of making people either feel safe or intimidated, depending on whether they were his friend or his enemy. Right now, he looked tense. "That was crazy in there, bro," Malik said, gripping Jamal's shoulder. "You really had that judge sweating, da." Jamal smirked, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah, but did you notice the way court ended?" Malik's grin faded. "You think something's up?" Jamal nodded. "Definitely." Malik scanned the hallway. "What you want to do?" Jamal thought for a second. Then he made a decision. "We need to find out why they adjourned early." That night, Jamal sat in his apartment, his laptop open in front of him. The rain outside tapped gently against the window, and the dim glow of his screen reflected in his sharp brown eyes. His instincts were screaming at him that something had shifted in his case. Judge Stone didn't adjourn court early for no reason. And Powell, he had been too mad, almost panicked. Jamal pulled up the court records, digging deeper into the prosecution's evidence. He already knew they had lied, but now he needed to find out why they were lying. Because one thing was becoming very clear. This wasn't just about pinning a crime on him. It was bigger than that. The real question was, who was behind it? His fingers danced over the keyboard, his mind working like a machine. Then, a message popped up on his screen. "Anonymous sender. Stop digging." Jamal's pulse spiked. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. Another message appeared. "Anonymous sender. You don't know what you're getting into. Drop it." Jamal's jaw clenched. He took a deep breath, then typed back. "Or what?" For a moment, nothing happened. Then, one final message. "Anonymous sender. Or you won't live to see the verdict." Jamal's blood turned ice cold. The screen suddenly flickered. Then, click, his laptop shut off by itself. A chill ran down his spine. Someone was watching him, and they weren't just trying to beat him in court. They were trying to erase him completely. Jamal's hands tightened into fists. If they thought that would scare him off, they didn't know who they were dealing with. Because he wasn't just going to fight this case. He was going to burn their entire system down. Jamal sat frozen, his laptop screen now black, his heartbeat pounding in his ears. Someone was watching him, someone powerful, and they wanted him gone. His fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment, but he knew there was no point in trying to restart the laptop. Whoever sent that message had already made their move. A quiet knock at the door made him snap his head up. Jamal's instincts screamed at him to be cautious. No one ever visited him this late. Rolling his wheelchair toward the door as silently as possible, he reached for the metal baseball bat Malik had left with him just in case. Another knock. This time, a little louder. Jamal took a slow breath and called out, "Who is it?" Silence. Then, "It's me." Jamal relaxed slightly. It was Malik's voice, but he wasn't stupid. He still checked the peephole. Sure enough, Malik was standing there, his broad frame barely fitting in the view. He looked tense. Jamal unbolted the door and let him in. The moment the door shut behind him, Malik turned to face him. "Bro," he said, his voice low, "we got a problem." Jamal nodded. "Yeah, I know." Malik's eyebrows furrowed. "How you know?" Jamal rolled back toward his desk, pointing at his laptop. "Somebody just hacked my system and sent me a threat. Told me to stop digging, or I won't live to see the verdict. Malik's face darkened. Oh, hell no. Jamal ran a hand over his chin, thinking, what's our problem? Malik exhaled sharply, pacing the small apartment. I was asking around about why they shut down court early today. I got a friend who works in the courthouse. You remember Tasha? Jamal nodded. She told me something weird. Said that right after you dropped that affidavit bomb in court, Judge Stone got a phone call from someone high up. Jamal frowned. Who? Malik shook his head. She don't know, but she heard enough to know that whoever it was, they weren't happy. Like, real unhappy. Jamal's fingers tapped against his wheelchair armrest. That explained the sudden adjournment, but it didn't explain why someone was threatening his life. Malik dropped onto the couch, rubbing his hands together. Look, man. You sure about this? 'Cause I ain't gon' lie. I don't like the way this is looking, da. Jamal locked eyes with him. Would you back down? Malik sighed, shaking his head. Nah. Jamal nodded. Then neither am I. Malik leaned back, crossing his arms. So what's the next move? Jamal took a deep breath. We find out who made that call. The next morning, the courtroom was packed. Reporters lined the back row, murmuring excitedly as they waited for the trial to resume. The tension in the air was thick, the energy different from the previous days. Something had shifted. Jamal felt it the moment he rolled into the courtroom. Judge Stone was already sitting at his bench, his face unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, something calculating. Powell was sitting stiffly at the prosecution table, his hands folded neatly, his expression tight. The jury members looked more alert. And on the far left side of the room, Jamal spotted a man in a dark suit and sunglasses, sitting in the spectator section. He wasn't taking notes. He wasn't reacting to anything. He was just watching. Jamal's gut twisted. This trial was no longer just about proving his innocence. It was about survival. Judge Stone cleared his throat. Court is now in session. Jamal straightened in his chair, his mind already working. If someone powerful was pulling strings behind the scenes, that meant Powell wasn't the real enemy. Powell was just a puppet. And the judge? Jamal wasn't sure yet. Judge Stone glanced at him. Mr. Carter, do you have anything you'd like to present before we resume with witness testimonies? Jamal leaned forward slightly, his voice steady. Yes, Your Honor. I'd like to make a request. The judge raised an eyebrow. A request? Jamal nodded. I'd like access to the court's call logs from yesterday. Specifically, the ones made during the trial recess. The request sent a ripple of murmurs through the courtroom. Judge Stone's expression didn't change, but Jamal saw the slight twitch in his jaw. He hadn't expected that. Jamal kept his face neutral. I assume that won't be a problem, he added. The judge's lips pressed into a thin line. And why, exactly, do you need those logs? Jamal tilted his head slightly. I think they might be relevant to my case. Powell shot up from his chair. Objection. This is completely irrelevant. Jamal turned to him, smiling slightly. Why are you so nervous, Mr. Powell? Powell stiffened. I'm not. I just asked for some call logs, Jamal said smoothly. If there's nothing to hide, then what's the problem? More murmurs filled the courtroom. Judge Stone's eyes flickered toward Powell. Jamal caught it, and in that moment, he knew. The judge was in on it too. Stone let out a slow breath. Request denied. Jamal's stomach clenched. Of course. He had expected this. But the way the judge denied it so quickly, so definitively, he had just confirmed what Jamal suspected. They were hiding something, and he was running out of time to find out what. Jamal took a steady breath and leaned back in his chair. The game had just changed. And if they thought they could shut him down that easily, they had no idea what they were up against. Jamal stared at Judge Stone, his face blank, but inside, his mind was racing. The judge had just denied his request for the court's call logs, which meant one thing. He was protecting someone. Jamal slowly exhaled through his nose. He needed to play this carefully. If he pushed too hard, they'd shut him down completely. But if he let them think they were still in control, well, then he could trap them. He adjusted his tie and nodded. Understood, Your Honor. Judge Stone raised an eyebrow, as if surprised that Jamal didn't argue further. Powell smirked, thinking he had won something. Let them think that, Jamal thought. The judge cleared his throat. Very well. We will proceed with the next witness. Powell stood, his confidence back. The prosecution calls Detective Kyle Wren to the stand. A tall, broad-shouldered man with graying hair made his way to the witness stand. His police uniform was neatly pressed, and his face was the kind that looked permanently annoyed. Jamal had been waiting for this. Detective Wren was the arresting officer in his case, the man who claimed he had irrefutable proof that Jamal was guilty. Jamal watched carefully as Wren was sworn in. The moment Powell started questioning him, it was clear what their strategy was. Paint Jamal as a delinquent, a troublemaker. Detective Wren, Powell said smoothly, you were the officer who responded to the crime scene on the night in question, correct? Yes, Wren replied. His voice was steady, professional. And when you arrived, what did you find? The store had been robbed, and the clerk was injured. Witnesses described the suspect as a young black male, late teens, wearing a hoodie. Security footage confirmed that description. Powell nodded and turned toward the jury. And when you later identified the suspect as Jamal Carter, were you certain he was the perpetrator? Absolutely. Powell smiled like a wolf. And why is that? Detective Wren folded his arms. Because we found the stolen goods in his neighborhood, not far from where he was seen that night. Murmurs spread through the courtroom. Jamal didn't move. He let the moment hang, let the jury absorb what they just heard. Then, when Powell was done, Jamal rolled himself forward. Your witness, Judge Stone said. Jamal adjusted his posture. This was it, the moment where everything changed. He tapped his fingers lightly on the table before speaking. Detective Wren, he began, his voice smooth, calm. You said you found the stolen goods in my neighborhood, not on me, not in my house, but in my neighborhood. Correct? Wren hesitated. That's correct. Jamal tilted his head slightly. And tell me, Detective, how big is my neighborhood? Wren frowned. What? My neighborhood, Jamal repeated, his voice patient. How many people live there? Wren shifted. I don't know. Jamal raised his eyebrows. Would you say it's more than 100 people?
Yes.
More than 500?
Yes.
More than 1,000? Wren's jaw clenched.
Yes.
Jamal leaned forward slightly. So, let me get this straight. You're saying that because somewhere in a neighborhood of over 1,000 people, you found stolen goods, that automatically means I put them there? Wren's mouth opened, then closed. Jamal didn't let him recover. Did you find my fingerprints on those stolen goods? Wren looked at Powell. Jamal smiled. I'll repeat the question. Did you find my fingerprints on those stolen goods? Wren shifted.
No.
Jamal nodded, pretending to think. Did you find any evidence that directly linked me to those stolen goods? Wren's jaw tightened. We had an eyewitness. Jamal held up a hand. Oh, you mean the same eyewitness who just admitted in an affidavit that he wasn't even there? Silence. The jury leaned forward, eyes locked on the detective. Jamal could feel it. The momentum shifting. He crossed his arms. Detective, tell me, isn't it true that you arrested me before even checking to see if I had an alibi? Wren's face darkened.
That's...
Answer the question. Jamal interrupted smoothly. Yes or no?
Yes.
Boom. Jamal saw Powell's face go pale. He turned to the jury, his voice calm but sharp. Ladies and gentlemen, this detective just admitted that he arrested me without checking if I was even near the crime scene. He also admitted that they found no fingerprints, no evidence, no real connection, just a hunch. Jamal let the words hang in the air. Then he turned back to Wren. I have one final question. Wren glared at him. Jamal's next words cut through the silence like a blade. Who ordered my arrest? The entire courtroom went still. Wren's expression twitched, just for a second. Jamal caught it. Powell shot up from his seat. Objection. Overruled, Judge Stone said, his voice tight. Powell flinched. Jamal's heart pounded. He locked eyes with Wren. Answer the question. Wren hesitated. Too long. Then, finally, in a low voice, he muttered. The order came from higher up. Jamal's stomach twisted. He had expected that answer. But hearing it out loud, it confirmed what he feared. Powell sat down, looking furious. Judge Stone was gripping his gavel so tightly his knuckles had turned white. Jamal exhaled slowly. This was bigger than he thought. Someone high up had wanted him arrested, and they were willing to manipulate evidence, witnesses, everything, to make sure he went down. Which meant one thing. They were afraid of him. And if they were afraid, that meant they had something to hide. Jamal leaned back in his chair, a slow smile forming on his lips. They had just made their biggest mistake. They let him see their weakness. Now, he was going to tear them apart. The courtroom was drowning in whispers. The jury was shifting in their seats, the audience was murmuring, and even the bailiff looked uncertain about what had just happened. Detective Wren, the man who had put the cuffs on Jamal and dragged him into this nightmare, had just admitted that his arrest came from higher up, and he hadn't wanted to say it. Jamal's heart pounded, but he kept his face calm. He had just cracked something open. Now, he had to figure out how deep the rot went. Judge Stone's face was tight, his lips pressed into a thin line. His grip on his gavel was so firm it looked like he might break it. "Detective Wren," he said slowly, his voice unusually strained. "You are excused from the stand." Wren exhaled, standing stiffly as he stepped down. He didn't look at Jamal. He looked ashamed. That was good. That meant Wren knew he had just made a huge mistake. Powell was furious. His hands were clenched into fists, his face red as he slammed his folder shut. Jamal smiled a little. It wasn't the smile of a cocky kid. It was the smile of someone who had just smelled blood in the water. Judge Stone cleared his throat, trying to regain control. "We will take a 15-minute recess," he announced. Jamal's smile widened. That was the second time the judge had shut things down early. That meant he was buying time, and that meant he was scared. 15 minutes later, Jamal wheeled himself back into the courtroom. Something was different. The air felt heavier. And then, he saw him. A man in a crisp gray suit, sitting in the front row of the audience. The same man in sunglasses from before. But now, the sunglasses were off. Jamal studied him. He looked like he belonged in a corporate boardroom, not a courtroom. His suit was too sharp, his posture too confident. He wasn't reacting to anything. He was just watching. Jamal's gut twisted. Whoever this man was, he was important. And that meant Jamal had just gotten someone's attention. Good. Let them watch. Jamal turned his focus back to the trial. Judge Stone adjusted his robe. "The prosecution may proceed." Powell stood. But he wasn't his usual smug self. He looked rattled. "We call Mr. Brandon Tucker to the stand." Jamal froze. Tucker, the store clerk who had supposedly identified him, the so-called victim of the robbery. Jamal had been waiting for this. A man in his late 40s, wearing a cheap button-down shirt and khakis, made his way to the stand. His hands were fidgeting. Jamal watched closely. This man was about to lie. He just didn't know Jamal was ready to destroy him. Powell straightened his tie. "Mr. Tucker, can you confirm for the court that you were working the night of the robbery?" "Yes," Tucker said, his voice a little shaky. "I was there." "And you saw the defendant, Jamal Carter, commit the crime?" Tucker nodded quickly. "Yes, absolutely. No doubt about it." Jamal let out a slow breath. "Liar." Powell smiled. "No further questions." He turned to Jamal, his smirk returning. "Your witness." Jamal took his time, adjusting his chair slightly before speaking. "Mr. Tucker," he said smoothly, "you're absolutely sure you saw me that night?" Tucker nodded again. "Yes. I saw you clear as day." Jamal tilted his head. "What color hoodie was I wearing?" Tucker blinked. Black?" Jamal nodded. "And how tall am I?" Tucker hesitated. "I don't know, man. You were sitting down when they arrested you." Jamal smiled. "But you just said you saw me clear as day. Shouldn't you have noticed my height?" Tucker's fingers twitched. I don't know." Jamal leaned forward slightly. "Were you wearing your glasses that night?" Tucker's face twisted in confusion. "What?" Jamal nodded toward the man's shirt pocket, where a pair of thick prescription glasses were tucked away. "You're wearing glasses now," Jamal said smoothly. "But were you wearing them that night?" Tucker's mouth opened, but no words came out. Jamal pressed harder. "Do you need those glasses to see clearly?" Tucker swallowed. "Why, yeah, I do." Jamal's voice sharpened. So how could you see me clear as day if you weren't wearing them? The courtroom exploded. The jury started whispering. Reporters scribbled notes, and Powell's face drained of color. Tucker looked trapped. Jamal didn't let up. "One more thing, Mr. Tucker," he said, his voice cutting through the noise. "Can you tell the court what time you say you saw me?" Tucker licked his lips. "It was around 11:30 p.m. Jamal nodded. "Thank you. Now, do you recognize this?" He pulled a small, folded piece of paper from his pocket and held it up. It was a receipt. Jamal unfolded it slowly, then turned it to the jury. "This," he said, "is a time-stamped receipt proving that at exactly 11:30 p.m., I was at a gas station 5 miles away from the crime scene." Silence. Then chaos. Powell shot out of his chair. "Objection. He can't just." "Overruled," Judge Stone snapped. But his voice wasn't as powerful as before. Because he knew. They had just lost their key witness. Jamal turned back to Tucker, his voice calm. "So tell me, Mr. Tucker." He let the words sink in. "If I was 5 miles away, who exactly did you see that night?" Tucker was shaking now. I don't. Did someone tell you to say you saw me?" Tucker's face paled. Jamal's voice was sharper now. "Who told you to say my name?" Tucker's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. His eyes flickered, just for a second, to Powell, and that was all Jamal needed. The jury caught it too. Jamal sat back, letting the moment settle. Then, he turned toward the man in the gray suit, still sitting quietly in the audience. Their eyes met. Jamal smiled. Because now, he wasn't just winning this case. He was hunting whoever was behind it, and he wasn't going to stop until he took them all down. The courtroom was on fire. People whispered in frantic tones. The jury stole nervous glances at each other. Even Judge Stone, the man who had mocked Jamal at the beginning of this trial, looked shaken. But no one looked more terrified than Brandon Tucker. Jamal had him trapped, and the whole room knew it. Jamal leaned forward slightly, his voice cutting through the thick tension. "Mr. Tucker," he said smoothly, "I'll ask you one last time." Tucker swallowed hard, his hands gripping the edges of the witness stand. Jamal tilted his head. "Who told you to say my name?" Tucker's eyes darted across the courtroom, as if searching for help, but there was none. He knew he was about to drown, and there was no lifeboat. Finally, his lips parted. His voice came out hoarse. "I." Bang. The courtroom doors slammed open. 2 uniformed officers stormed in, their hands resting on their weapons. The entire room fell into chaos. Judge Stone's eyes snapped toward the commotion. "What is the meaning of this?" One of the officers, a tall man with a hard expression, stepped forward. "Your Honor," he said briskly, "we have an urgent matter." Jamal's stomach twisted. Something wasn't right. Powell looked like he had been expecting this interruption. His smug expression had returned, and his arms were folded like a man watching his problems disappear. Jamal clenched his jaw. They were trying to bury his momentum. And worse, they were doing it legally. Judge Stone frowned. "What kind of urgent matter?" The officer didn't flinch. "We have an arrest warrant." Silence. Then, murmurs filled the room. Jamal's blood ran cold. An arrest warrant? The officer turned his head, and then, he pointed, right at Malik, Jamal's best friend. Jamal's stomach dropped. Malik blinked in shock. "Wait, what?" Jamal's hands tightened on his chair's armrests as the officers moved toward Malik, their presence heavy, their movements firm. "This is a mistake," Malik protested, stepping back. "I didn't do anything." Jamal's mind raced. This wasn't an accident. This was a message. A warning. Jamal turned sharply to Powell. The smirking prosecutor didn't even look at him. He just straightened his tie and said, Well, what an unfortunate coincidence." Jamal felt the rage in his bones. They were playing dirty. They knew Jamal was getting too close to the truth, so they were coming after the people he cared about. Judge Stone, of course, didn't stop it. "Officer," he said smoothly, "what are the charges?" The officer pulled out a piece of paper, reading aloud. "Malik Thompson, you are under arrest for obstruction of justice and witness tampering." Gasps filled the room. Jamal couldn't believe what he was hearing. Malik? Witness tampering? It was a joke. A blatant, Ugly lie. Malik's face was twisted in fury. That's a lie, man. I ain't tamper with nobody. The officer didn't care. Turn around and place your hands behind your back. Jamal's heart pounded. He had to stop this. He turned to Judge Stone. This is a setup, he said sharply. They're trying to intimidate me. Judge Stone's expression was unreadable. Just look over his shoulder. And what he said next sent chills down Jamal's spine. They're scared of you, bro, Malik said. That's why they're doing this. Then he was gone, taken away like a pawn in someone's twisted game. Jamal sat there, gripping his chair so tightly his fingers ached. Judge Stone cleared his throat. Shall we continue, Mr. Carter? Jamal turned his head slowly, looking the judge dead in the eye. His voice was cold. Yes, Your Honor, he said. Let's continue. The judge's face remained neutral, but there was something in his eyes. For the first time, he looked nervous. Jamal had seen it. And now, he was going to burn this entire system to the ground. Jamal sat motionless, his jaw clenched so tightly it ached. They had taken Malik, right in front of him, right in front of everyone, and no one had done a damn thing about it. The courtroom still buzzed with murmurs, but Jamal wasn't listening. His mind was running like a high-speed train, analyzing every angle, every possibility. This wasn't just a scare tactic. This was a warning. The people behind his arrest, the real ones, the ones pulling the strings, they were getting desperate, and desperate people made mistakes. Judge Stone cleared his throat, pretending like nothing had just happened. Let's resume the proceedings. Jamal slowly turned his head toward the judge, locking eyes with him, and in that moment, he made a promise to himself. You're going down, old man. Judge Stone looked away first. Coward. Powell, meanwhile, had regained his smugness. He sat with his arms folded, legs crossed, looking as if he had already won. Jamal forced himself to push the anger down. Emotions wouldn't win this fight. Strategy would. He took a slow, steady breath and turned back to the witness stand. Brandon Tucker was still there, still sweating, still looking like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Good. Mr. Tucker, Jamal said smoothly, as if they hadn't just witnessed a blatant act of corruption. We were discussing your testimony before we were rudely interrupted. Powell shot him a glare. Jamal ignored him. Tucker swallowed hard. Why, yeah. Jamal leaned back slightly. Now, let's go over this one more time, because I want to be very clear. He pulled out the receipt again, holding it up for everyone to see. This receipt, he said, proves I was 5 miles away at the exact time of the robbery. Tucker's eyes darted toward Powell, but Powell didn't move. He was leaving Tucker to sink on his own. Jamal smiled. Now, Mr. Tucker, he continued, his voice soft but sharp, since I couldn't have been at the crime scene, that means you either lied, or you were told to say my name. Tucker's leg bounced under the stand. Jamal let the silence stretch. He could feel the weight of the jury's eyes, the pressure closing in on Tucker like a noose. Then, I don't know what you're talking about, Tucker stammered. Jamal nodded slowly, pretending to believe him. All right, he said. Then let's try this another way. He turned toward Judge Stone. Your Honor, I request permission to submit a call log report from Mr. Tucker's phone. The entire courtroom froze. Powell bolted upright. Objection. Judge Stone hesitated. On what grounds? Powell clenched his jaw. That's an unlawful invasion of privacy. Jamal raised an eyebrow. It's only unlawful if I stole the information, Mr. Powell. He smirked. But Mr. Tucker here voluntarily provided his phone records to an independent investigator. So it's perfectly legal. More gasps. Powell's face turned red. Judge Stone rubbed his temple. He looked like a man walking a tightrope over fire. Overruled, he muttered. Jamal slid the report onto the evidence table. Then, he turned back to Tucker. I'm gonna make this real simple for you, he said. The night before you testified against me, you got a call. A very interesting call. Tucker's breathing quickened. Jamal smiled, slow and deliberate. Guess who it was from? Tucker's mouth was dry. He shook his head. I don't. Jamal held up the log. It was from the district attorney's office. The courtroom erupted. Powell froze. Judge Stone's face went pale. Jamal pressed on. his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "Now, I'm just guessing here, but I'm willing to bet that the person who called you told you exactly what to say in court." Tucker wiped sweat from his forehead. I. Jamal leaned forward. "You're already drowning, Mr. Tucker," he said softly. "You can't save yourself, but you can make a choice." Tucker looked at the jury, then at Powell, then back at Jamal. Jamal could see it. The exact moment the man realized he was done, he exhaled shakily. "I was told what to say." Silence. Pure, deafening silence. Jamal folded his hands. "By who?" Tucker's lips trembled. Then, slowly, he turned his head toward Powell. The courtroom exploded. Reporters were scrambling. Jurors were whispering in shock, and Powell looked like he was about to collapse. Jamal stayed still, absorbing the moment. He had just done something huge. He had just exposed the prosecution. Judge Stone slammed his gavel, his voice shaking. "Order! Order in the court!" It took nearly a full minute for the room to calm down. Then, the judge turned to Powell, his expression unreadable.
"Mr. Powell."
Powell was still frozen, as if reality hadn't hit him yet. Judge Stone's voice hardened. "Do you have anything to say?" Powell's mouth opened. No words came out. Jamal just sat back, letting it all sink in. He had just turned their entire case upside down. And the people behind this frame job? They were panicking. Jamal's gaze flickered to the man in the gray suit. For the first time, the man's expression changed. He looked concerned. "Good." Jamal smirked. This wasn't just about proving his innocence anymore. This was about exposing every single person who had tried to bury him. And he was just getting started. Powell's hands were trembling. His usually neat tie was slightly loosened, and for the first time since this trial began, he looked completely lost. Judge Stone sat stiffly on the bench, his fingers wrapped so tightly around his gavel that his knuckles were white. The entire courtroom was frozen in the aftermath of Tucker's confession. Jamal let the moment breathe. He wanted everyone to feel it. The weight of what had just happened. A key witness had just admitted, under oath, that he had been told what to say. And the person who had told him? The prosecution itself. Powell finally found his voice, but it was shaky. "Why, Your Honor, this is ridiculous. This is nothing but—" Jamal held up a hand. "Actually, it's perjury, tampering, and obstruction of justice," he said calmly. "But I get it, Mr. Powell. It's easy to confuse those things when you're the one committing them." Laughter rippled through the audience. Judge Stone banged his gavel hard. "That's enough." Jamal turned toward him, locking eyes. "And yet, I notice you didn't strike Tucker's confession from the record," he said, his voice casual but piercing. Judge Stone flinched. For the first time, Jamal felt a slow, steady burn in his chest. He was getting closer. The web of corruption was unraveling, and now everyone in this courtroom knew it. Judge Stone exhaled through his nose. "Mr. Powell," he said, his voice unusually tight, "do you have any response to these concerning allegations?" Powell's lips pressed together. He was cornered. If he admitted to this, his entire case, and possibly his career, was over. But if he denied it, Jamal would bury him with more evidence. Powell swallowed hard. "Your Honor," he said carefully, "I believe we need a recess." "Coward." Jamal smirked, shaking his head. "No," he said, his voice calm but firm. "We don't." Judge Stone's head snapped toward him. "Excuse me?" Jamal folded his hands. "I think we've had enough recesses in this trial," he said smoothly. "Every time the prosecution is backed into a corner, we take a break. Every time I start pulling at the strings of this case, we pause. But I'm done playing by their rules." He gestured toward Powell. "He has nothing to say because there is nothing to say. They lied. They cheated. And now they're scrambling to cover their tracks." Powell looked like he wanted to disappear. The jury was staring at him now, not with trust, but with doubt. And doubt? Doubt was everything. Judge Stone rubbed his temple, clearly furious. He turned to Tucker, who was still slumped in the witness stand, looking as if he regretted ever showing up today. "Mr. Tucker," Stone said sharply, "you are dismissed." Tucker practically ran from the stand, disappearing into the crowd. Jamal sat back, rolling his shoulders. He had expected them to try something. What he hadn't expected was for them to fall apart this quickly. Something was wrong. Someone powerful had wanted him buried. And Powell? Powell was just the face of it. Which meant Jamal's eyes flickered toward the man in the gray suit. The man who had been watching him since the trial began. The man who never reacted to anything. Until now, Jamal noticed it. The slight shift in posture, the way his jaw tightened. This wasn't just any spectator. This was the real problem. Jamal turned back toward Judge Stone. "Your Honor," he said smoothly, "I'd like to motion for an immediate dismissal of all charges against me." Gasps spread through the courtroom. Judge Stone stiffened. Powell gasped. "Absolutely not," he snapped, his voice breaking slightly. "That's not how." Jamal smiled. "It is how it works," he said, his voice sharp as a blade. "Your case is built on a witness who just admitted he lied. You have no fingerprints, no evidence, no timeline. The only thing you do have is a prosecutor who just got exposed for witness tampering." He let that sink in. Then, he delivered the final blow. "If you continue this trial," Jamal said slowly, "it will no longer be me on trial." His eyes burned into Judge Stone's. "It'll be you." The room went silent. Judge Stone's hands clenched into fists. His entire body looked rigid, his face unreadable. Then, the man in the gray suit stood up and left the courtroom. Jamal tracked him with his eyes, his stomach twisting. That was it. That was the real power. And the moment that man walked out, Jamal knew. Judge Stone was about to fold. The judge let out a slow breath. Then, finally, he looked at Powell. And for the first time in this entire trial, there was no respect in his eyes. "Motion granted," Judge Stone said, his voice almost robotic. The courtroom erupted. The charges were dropped. Jamal had won, but he didn't celebrate. Not yet, because whoever that man in the gray suit was, he wasn't done with Jamal. And Jamal? Jamal wasn't done with him either. Jamal sat still as the courtroom erupted around him. People were cheering. Reporters were scrambling for their phones. The jury looked stunned, their faces a mixture of shock and relief. But Jamal? Jamal wasn't smiling. He had just won the biggest trial of his life. And yet, he knew this wasn't over. Not even close. His eyes flickered toward the courtroom doors, the same doors where the man in the gray suit had disappeared. Who was he? Why had he left the second Judge Stone dismissed the case? And more importantly, why did it feel like that man was the one who actually pulled the strings in this entire courtroom? Jamal exhaled through his nose. Something wasn't right. Judge Stone cleared his throat, forcing the room back to order. His voice was stiff, robotic. "This court is adjourned." He banged his gavel one last time, then immediately stood up and walked out, fast. Jamal smirked to himself. The man was rattled. He should be. Jamal had humiliated him. But he had a feeling Judge Stone wasn't the biggest fish in this dirty pond. Powell, meanwhile, looked like a man who had just lost everything. His hands were shaking as he packed up his files. Jamal wheeled himself forward slightly. "Rough day?" he asked smoothly. Powell snapped his head toward him, eyes blazing. "You think this is over?" Jamal raised an eyebrow. "Legally?"
Yeah.
Powell let out a bitter laugh. "You really don't know what you just did, do you?" Jamal tilted his head. "Oh, I know exactly what I did," he said. "I exposed you." Powell smirked, but it was empty, hollow. "You exposed me, huh?" he muttered. "Kid, I was just the face of this operation, a pawn. Do you think I made the decision to frame you?" Jamal's stomach clenched. He had suspected it, but hearing it confirmed, that was different. Powell slung his briefcase over his shoulder. His voice dropped lower. "You should be careful, Carter." Jamal narrowed his eyes. "Or what?" Powell didn't answer. He just gave him a look. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away. Jamal's fists clenched. So it wasn't just about this case. This went deeper. And if Powell wasn't the one calling the shots, then who was? Outside the courthouse, the streets were chaos. Reporters swarmed the steps, their cameras flashing, their voices overlapping as they shouted for a statement. Jamal wheeled himself forward, his expression unreadable. He could hear their words like static in the air. Jamal, how does it feel to prove the system wrong? Did you expect to win? Who do you think was behind your false arrest? That last question stuck. Because he wanted to know. Malik was waiting at the bottom of the courthouse steps, his arms crossed, a proud grin on his face. The cops had let him go the second the trial ended, probably because they knew their case against him was just as weak as the one against Jamal. Jamal rolled up beside him. Malik smirked. Told you they were scared of you, bro. Jamal exhaled. Yeah, but that's what worries me. Malik frowned. What you mean? Jamal's fingers drummed against his armrest. They gave up too easy, he muttered. Powell and Judge Stone? They were desperate, but somebody else was pulling the strings. Malik nodded, his face growing serious. That dude in the gray suit? Jamal's jaw clenched. Yeah. Malik looked around. You see him anywhere? Jamal scanned the crowd. Nothing. The man had vanished. Jamal swallowed hard.
No.
Malik patted his shoulder. Forget him, man. You won. You ain't gotta think about this no more. Jamal wished that were true, but his gut told him otherwise. Later that night, Jamal sat in his apartment, staring at the court documents spread across his desk. Something wasn't sitting right. If Powell wasn't the mastermind behind his arrest, then who was? He grabbed his laptop and pulled up his case file. There had to be something in here. Something he had missed. He scrolled through the documents, his eyes scanning every detail. Then, his screen flickered. Jamal froze. For a split second, his entire screen turned black. Then, a single message appeared. Stop digging. Jamal's heart pounded. Another message popped up. You got lucky today. Walk away. Jamal's fingers hovered over the keyboard. A third message. This time, we framed you. Next time, we won't need to. Jamal stood up so fast his chair rolled back. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. And now? Now, he knew who his real enemy was. Whoever they were watching him, and they weren't done with him yet. Jamal exhaled, his pulse racing. Then, slowly, he typed back, "Bring it." The screen shut off instantly. Jamal stared at his reflection in the dark monitor. They thought they could scare him. They thought he would just walk away. They were wrong. Because now, Jamal was coming for them. Jamal didn't sleep that night. Not because he was scared. Because he was angry. Whoever was behind this, the frame job, the trial, the threats, they thought they could control him. They thought they could shut him up. But they had made one huge mistake. They let him win. And now, he had power. Jamal sat at his desk, staring at his blacked-out laptop screen. His heart was pounding, but his mind was clear. They had sent him a warning. But what they didn't realize was that Jamal Carter didn't do warnings. He did counterattacks. His fingers flexed over his keyboard. The system rebooted. They had shut down his laptop remotely, but Jamal had spent years learning how to work around problems like this. He ran a security check. His entire system had been compromised. Someone had remote access to his files, his browsing history, everything. He clenched his jaw. Whoever they weren't playing games. Neither was he. Jamal pulled out his phone and dialed. Malik picked up on the first ring. Bro, it's 3 a.m. Jamal didn't bother with small talk. I need you to come over. Malik sighed. Man, you just won your case. Can't you take a minute to breathe? Jamal's voice was cold. They hacked my laptop. Silence. Then, I'm on my way. 15 minutes later, Malik stormed into Jamal's apartment, his hoodie pulled up, his face tight with tension. They really came at you again? He asked. Jamal nodded, tilting his laptop screen to show Malik the last messages. Malik let out a low whistle. Damn, they really don't want you sniffing around. Jamal leaned back. Which is exactly why I am sniffing around. Malik frowned. Bro, what if this ain't some small-time setup? What if it's bigger? Jamal finished. I know it's bigger. Malik exhaled. Then why poke the bear? Jamal's fingers drummed against his desk. Because if I don't, they'll keep coming for me anyway. He turned his laptop back on and pulled up a new search. I need to figure out who that man in the gray suit was. Malik scratched his head. You sure he's the big boss? No, Jamal admitted. But I am sure that he wasn't just some random guy watching the trial. He left right when I turned the case on its head. Malik's face darkened. Like he knew the game was up. Jamal nodded.
Exactly.
He scrolled through online databases, searching for any recent government officials, corporate executives, or high-ranking law figures who had been seen at the courthouse. Nothing. Whoever this man was, he was good at staying hidden. Jamal exhaled sharply. Fine. If he couldn't find the man directly, he'd have to go another way. He pulled up Judge Stone's records. If there was one thing Jamal had learned in his years of studying the law, it was that everyone left a paper trail. Malik leaned over his shoulder. You trying to dig up dirt on the judge? Jamal's eyes narrowed. No. I'm trying to see who owns him. An hour later, Jamal found what he was looking for. It was buried deep, hidden in layers of shell companies and political donations. But there it was. A massive financial contribution made to Judge Stone's re-election campaign 2 years ago. The amount? $2 million. Jamal's stomach tightened. Malik whistled low. That's a whole lot of money for a local judge. Jamal nodded. And guess who it came from? Malik leaned in, reading the screen. His eyes widened. Echelon Holdings? Jamal's mouth was dry. He had heard that name before. A massive private conglomerate. They had their hands in everything. Finance, tech, real estate, even law enforcement. They were everywhere. And they were powerful. Malik rubbed his chin. So you're telling me some giant company paid off Judge Stone? Jamal exhaled. Not just paid off. Owned him. Malik shook his head. Bro, you gotta stop. Jamal turned sharply.
No.
Jay, listen to me, Malik said, his voice firm. This ain't no regular corrupt cop or prosecutor. This is big. You're talking about going after the kind of people who can make people disappear. Jamal's stomach twisted, but he didn't back down. I don't care, he said. They tried to take me down, and when that didn't work, they threatened me. Then they came for you. Malik's jaw clenched. Jamal's voice was quiet but sharp. I can't let that slide, Malik sighed, rubbing his face. I swear, you got a death wish. Jamal shook his head. No, I got unfinished business. He turned back to his screen, his eyes locked on the name. Echelon Holdings. They had tried to bury him. Now, he was going to burn them to the ground. But before he could take another step, his phone buzzed. A text. Unknown number. You don't want to do this. Jamal's grip on his phone tightened. Another text. Unknown number. Walk away, Jamal. Last chance. Jamal's blood ran cold. He didn't respond. Instead, he turned to Malik. His best friend was already reading the messages over his shoulder. Malik exhaled. They're watching you, bro. Jamal's voice was steady. I know. Malik looked at him carefully. What you gonna do? Jamal locked eyes with him. He already knew the answer. I'm gonna find out who's sending these messages. Malik shook his head. And when you do? Jamal smirked. Then I'm gonna send them one back. Jamal sat in the dim glow of his laptop screen, his fingers tapping rhythmically against the desk. His phone lay beside him, the last text still glowing on the screen. Unknown number. You don't want to do this. He had seen threats before. He had been underestimated before. But this was something else. They were watching him, and they weren't hiding it anymore. Jamal glanced at Malik, who was sitting on the couch, rubbing his face like he was trying to wake up from a bad dream. Bro, Malik muttered. This is straight up. Jamal smirked. Then why are you still here? Malik let out a frustrated sigh. 'Cause somebody gotta be around to stop you from getting yourself killed. Jamal turned back to his screen. Then help me track this number. Malik stared at him for a second, then let out a low groan. Man, I swear, I'm gonna regret this. Jamal's fingers flew across the keyboard. He wasn't a hacker, but he knew his way around tracing digital footprints. He ran the number through multiple reverse lookup databases. Most of them gave him nothing, but one of them gave him an address. Jamal sat up straight. Got it. Malik leaned over his shoulder. Where? Jamal's stomach tightened. Echelon Holdings. Malik's eyes widened. Oh, hell no. Jamal didn't blink.
It's them.
Malik shot up from the couch, pacing. Jay, I'm telling you, you're playing with fire. These ain't some street thugs. These are people who own politicians, cops, judges. You think they're just gonna let you expose them? Jamal's jaw clenched. I don't care. Malik stopped pacing and turned to him, his voice serious. Bro, they framed you for a crime you ain't commit. You barely beat them. And now? You pokin' the beast again. Jamal exhaled. Then he looked up at Malik, his eyes burning with something dangerous. They didn't just frame me, he said quietly. They framed who knows how many people before me. And if I don't do something about it, they're gonna do it again. Malik's face softened. He knew Jamal wasn't just in this for himself. He never was. All right, Malik muttered. So what's the plan? Jamal turned back to his screen. We go after them now. Malik groaned again. Knew you were gonna say that. The next day, Jamal and Malik sat in an old, beat-up car parked outside a massive glass building in the heart of the city. Echelon Holdings. From the outside, it looked like a regular corporate headquarters. But Jamal knew better. He had spent all night digging. Echelon wasn't just a business. It was a machine. It funded campaigns. It owned judges. It had deep connections in law enforcement. And most importantly, it had several cases where people, just like Jamal, had been mysteriously convicted with little to no evidence. It was a system, a factory for framing innocent people. Jamal clenched his fists. He had only been a small piece of their game. And now, he was about to flip the whole damn board. Malik peeked through the window. So, what exactly are we doing here? Jamal smirked. Getting inside. Malik nearly choked. Inside? What? You got a death wish? Jamal nodded toward the delivery entrance. No, I got a plan. Malik followed his gaze. A truck was pulling up, carrying boxes marked confidential documents. Malik blinked. Nah, bro, nope. Jamal grinned. Come on, he said, opening the car door. Let's crash a party. 10 minutes later, Jamal and Malik were inside the building, hidden behind stacks of crates. The security was tight, but not too tight. People here weren't expecting someone to just walk in. Jamal moved fast, wheeling down the corridor while Malik kept watch. They reached an elevator marked restricted access. Malik muttered, "This is the part where we get shot." Jamal ignored him, pulling out a stolen ID badge he had swiped from a distracted worker in the loading bay. He swiped it. The elevator dinged open. Malik blinked. Yo, what don't you know how to do? Jamal smirked. Stay out of trouble. They stepped inside. The doors closed. Jamal hit the sublevel 3 button. That was where the real secrets were. The ones nobody was supposed to see. The elevator moved down, smooth and silent. Malik tapped his foot nervously. Bro, if they catch us down here, we ain't gonna get a fair trial. Jamal didn't look up. Then we don't get caught. The elevator stopped. The doors slid open, and what they saw made both of them freeze. Rows and rows of filing cabinets, stacks of documents, computer screens flashing case numbers, photos, names, people who had been framed. Malik whispered, "What the hell is this place?" Jamal's throat was dry. It was a vault of corruption. Jamal rolled himself forward, scanning the papers, and then he saw it, a file with his name on it. His blood turned to ice. Slowly, he reached for it, his hands shaking. He opened it, and what he saw inside made his heart stop. It wasn't just about his case. It was about who ordered it. His breath hitched. Malik looked over his shoulder. Yo, what is it? Jamal turned to him, his face pale.
It's him.
Malik frowned. Who? Jamal swallowed hard. Then, he whispered the name of the man who had orchestrated everything. The man in the gray suit. The man who had watched him in court. The man who had left when things went sideways. And now, Jamal had proof of who he was. The Attorney General. Malik took a step back. Nah, no way. Jamal clenched his fists. Oh, it was very real. The highest legal authority in the state had been running a framing ring. And Jamal Carter? He had just found the evidence to take him down. But before he could even process it, a deep click echoed behind them. The sound of a gun being cocked. Jamal and Malik froze. A voice spoke from the shadows. Cold. Controlled. Well? Jamal turned slowly. And there he was, the man in the gray suit, standing in the doorway, holding a gun. His face was calm. His eyes were unreadable. And then, he smiled. "I told you to walk away, Jamal." Jamal's heart pounded, but he didn't panic. Instead, he smirked and said the one thing that would change everything. "You're under arrest."